Welcome to the Three Old Goalies podcast, a Delusion Group podcast. The Three Old Goalies are brought to you by Scora, your digital soccer agent. Please help the Three Old Goalies by leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform of choice. The music for the Three Old Goalies is provided by the Floodgate operators. You can find their music on iTunes and Spotify. As always, the Three Old Goalies are not intended for goalkeepers under the age of 17. Parents, please have your earmuffs on the ready. And now we send you over to the start of the show with the Three Old Goalies.
All right, well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Three Old Goalies. My name is EV. We are tonight joined by a very special guest, Ronnie Pascale, and also, as always, Greg Deutsch is with us from Cincinnati. A couple of things before we get started. One is that we understand 100% that goalies is not the right term for goalkeepers in soccer, but that's the term we chose because it just kind of comes off the tongue better as three old goalies than three old goalkeepers. So you're going to have to bear with us on that. More important than that is this is a podcast where perhaps anyone under 17 should not be listening to because we are old guys. We tell old stories. We embellish them with colorful language sometimes. So parents, have your kids put your earmuffs on if they're supposed to listen. And that's sort of the disclaimer on that. The third thing is the opinions expressed on this podcast are our opinions. Okay, they're opinions. They are not etched in stone. They're our opinions, and they're you can't have them. They're ours. So you certainly can enter your opinions in the comments section if you choose to do, and we welcome that. But please don't take it any further than we're just expressing our opinions. So without further ado, we will get going tonight. As I said, our special guest is Ronnie Pascale, who is a dear friend of mine. I've known him for many years, and actually had the privilege of training him for a few summers when I was coaching at UNC Charlotte. And he went on from college soccer, I believe, at Furman, and played at with the Richmond Kickers for, was it 14 or 15 years, Ronnie?
13 years with the Kickers, 14 years total. So,
yeah,
a long time.
13 years with the Kickers. And if I'm not mistaken, and I'm sure Greg will get into this, but if I'm not mistaken, you were like the Iron Man of goalkeeping, right?
I actually am
played every game for 13 years.
The career leader in games played for the Richmond Kickers. Over 300 games played. I need to do something with Wikipedia because they've got it wrong.
Wow. Over 300 games.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, back then, too, the season was like 5 or 6 months long. So you're cramming, 30 to 40 games into a 5-month season.
Yeah.
It was pretty crazy.
Yeah. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Richmond, and I'm sure Greg will get into this, but the Richmond Kickers were one of those teams that started in the USISL, went to the A-League, went to USL, for the duration of their, and they're still in existence.
Yeah, so they're actually the longest continuously run professional soccer club in the country. Yeah. Funny, so us and the Battery are the same, years old, but right. We had our first game on a Friday night, and that Saturday we played Charleston, and that was their first game. So we got them by 24 hours.
You got them by a day.
Yeah, good. Yeah, if that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and in 13 years, you didn't miss a whole lot of games, did you? I mean, you weren't injured much.
No, so it took me a couple of years to kind of earn the starting spot. So my first year was 2000 with Richmond, and I kind of took the place of Alex Deegan. Deegan was on the team with Mike McGinty.
Oh yeah.
And I thought I would get an opportunity to play, but McGinnis was pretty solid back then. So my first year, I think I played 2 games, started 2 games, played in 3, so didn't really get that much time. Right. I had signed a 1-year contract with an option, didn't realize it wasn't my option. And obviously was trying to get out, and they were like, nope, we got you for 1 more year. So I was kind of stuck in the goalie paradigm of, Lee Calishaw was my coach.
Yeah.
And I was like, Lee, I want to play. He's like, well, you're doing really good in practice. I'm like, all right, great. So let me play. He goes, but you don't have enough experience. Right. I'm like, all right, so how do I get experience? Well, you have to play games. All right, well, put me in a game to play. Well, I'm not going to if you don't have experience.
Right.
So 2001, I actually went down to Greenville and played on loan with the Greenville Lions for a couple games. Scotty Halkett was the coach. Remember Cutter?
Yeah.
And I would get in my car. I'd drive 6 hours to Greenville. I'd play a game. I'd get in my car, drive 6 hours home to sit the bench for the Kickers the next night. And I think my first game with Greenville, I made like 21 saves. I was the league. I don't remember what league they played in at the time, but I was like the league player of the week and did it a couple times. And that year I ended up starting like 7 or 8 games for the Kickers. And that was going to be the transition of like, all right, you signed in 2002 and we'll kind of, you and McGinnis, it's the last year of his contract, and we'll kind of transition you in. And then that offseason, Mike signed as the 3rd keeper for DC United. So all of a sudden, I'm like, hey, guess what? I get to start. And that's when it really started. That's when I, was playing basically every game.
Okay, and I don't want to steal Greg's thunder here because he'll go through all this again. But
you have EV, but that's okay.
Yeah, I know, and I apologize for that. But and now you are the national sales director for Brock Products. Tell us about Brock Products.
Yeah, so Brock USA, we're in the synthetic turf industry. We consider ourselves a safety company. So we're actually a 25-year-old company. We do a shock pad that goes underneath the turf. We kind of call it a guaranteed safety layer. It helps protect against concussions. There's a lot more head-to-surface concussions in sports than I ever thought there were. So we do a shock pad that goes underneath the turf. And then in 2019, we came out with an organic infill. So instead of the black rubber that gets in your shoes all the time, it's actually an engineered wood product. So we came out with that in 2019. And I started with Brock actually 10 years ago. And it was basically a company of like 8 or 9 people. I covered everything east of the Mississippi. And then my boss, who is our CEO, lived in Boulder, and he kind of covered that part of the country, and his brother was in Southern California, and that was basically it. And we've grown to a point now where we've got 9 salespeople underneath me. We call them VPs. So I've got 9 VPs directly underneath me, and we're considered the premium shock pad in the industry, and kind of the go-to company when it comes with safety and consulting and things like that.
Cool. And again, Bone, I don't want to take away from you, but the reason I asked that question is because when I was at Parker Athletic, we went out to Boulder and talked to Brock USA. And is Dan still there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He is CEO and founder, and he's still plugging away, and he's Dude, incredible.
What's his last name? Is it Brock?
Sawyer. Dan Sawyer.
Dan Sawyer. Anyway.
Yeah.
So we got there and we try, this is when we're doing the shin guards, Greg. And so we're figuring, we'll use this stuff because we'll put it in the shin guards. It'll be cool. It's breathable and everything. Well, it held too much moisture. So it set up the fiberglass, right? So we couldn't use it. But Dan sent me a pair of TPS hockey gloves with Brock protection in them. Okay. And this was 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And I still use them. I've had them repalmed twice. Okay. Because they're the greatest gloves ever. Right. And so, it didn't work out for Parker Athletic, but I got a bitching pair of hockey gloves out of it. So it was good. So, but then without further ado, turning it over to you, Greg. Let it rip. You can go back over all this stuff if you want to.
Yeah,
that was a great intro.
All good. Well, first, Ronnie, I don't think people know that you're from North Salem, New York.
Yes. The booming metropolis of North Salem, New York.
Yeah, so share with us where that is and how the journey from there to Furman, South Carolina, because that seems a little odd, especially back then.
Yeah, so North Salem is a really small town in Upper Westchester County, New York. About 60 miles from New York City, but I was a mile from the Connecticut border. We like to say there's more horses than there are people in North Salem. Went to a public high school. I graduated with 56 kids, and that was a big class for my school. And it was the type of place where kids they went to nursery school together and they were in school together all the way through high school. Surprisingly, North Salem had a really, really good soccer team, which was weird because we didn't have football, so all the athletes played soccer instead. So that was actually pretty cool for me in that part. But growing up in North Salem, I lived off of a dirt road, 9 acres of woods. My dad was a carpenter. He bought the property years and years and years ago and built a house that we grew up in. During the summer, when you're driving on the dirt road, you couldn't even see that there was a house back there. So it was pretty cool. It's a type of thing as a kid. It's not the coolest because there's nothing to do. But as an adult, you go back and it's just super relaxing and a ton of fun. So when I was growing up, I loved soccer, started playing when I was 3. And every summer I would do a thing called the Eastern Soccer Academy, which was a camp. They had a couple day camps, and then they had an overnight camp at, I believe it was called the Gunnery in Connecticut. And I was always a field player. Well, I went to this camp, and at the time I was only playing ASO soccer. That's all we had was ASO in North Salem. There were no travel teams or anything. So I go to this camp, and one year I decide I'm 12 years old. I'm bored doing the field player stuff. I'm going to be a goalkeeper this week, just completely messing around. Well, one of the local select team coaches from Somers, which is the town next door, saw me, and he was like, "Oh, this kid's a good keeper. We need him. We want to sign him up for our team." So my mom comes to pick me up, and the guy's like, "Oh, are you Ronnie's mom?" She's like, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, I'm Jim Nealis. I coach the Somers travel team. I'd love to have Ronnie come. We need another goalkeeper." My mom's like, "Oh, you got the wrong kid. He's not a keeper." And he's like, "Yeah, he is. He's down there playing right now." My mom's like, "I'm telling you, you got the wrong kid. He's not a goalie." And he's like, "Look, he's down there." And I was diving around in goal. And that's kind of started my travel career right there. And about a year or two after that, I ended up being invited to try out for a team called FC Westchester, which is still around. And at the time, it was coached by Al Pastor, who's a legend in the youth soccer game. And he kind of did something with FC Westchester that was really unheard of at the time. Kids were quitting their state team and their regional team to come play for us. So I got in with FC Westchester, and the whole goal with FC was basically trying to develop kids and get them scholarships to play college soccer. So I played for FC for a while, and we'd go to all these tournaments. And then junior year of high school, we had a tournament down at UNC Charlotte. At the time, Al's son was playing there, Brian. Frank Kohlenstein was the coach. Evie was goalkeeper coach. And they had a tournament every, I think it was Easter weekend or somewhere. It was sometime around spring break. So my mom and I decided to visit 14 schools in a week because I knew I wanted to go south. I wanted to get out of New York, and the best college soccer was in, the Mid-Atlantic region. So we ended up visiting 14 schools in a week, just driving around. And it was one of those weird things where as soon as we drove onto Furman's campus, I'm like, this is where I'm going. I ended up only applying to one school. We reached out to, it was John Tart at the time, Coach Tart. Reached out to Coach Tart. He saw me play a couple times, and everything kind of fortunately worked out. Then the following year after I had committed, it was spring. I was in a hotel somewhere, I don't remember, for some tournament, and Coach Tart calls me, and I knew John Bush was the goalkeeper at UNC Charlotte at the time. Well, John Tart calls me up, and he's like, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know, I'm leaving Furman. I just got the head job at UNC Charlotte. I'd love you to come. We need a good backup." And I kind of was taken aback. I'm like, that's an interesting recruiting technique there. But I was like, well, I appreciate it, but I really picked Furman for the school and not the coach. So I'm just gonna stay here. And luckily for me, Furman ended up hiring Doug Allison, who is still there now. And Doug was absolutely phenomenal. So he was my coach my freshman year. That preseason is still probably the hardest 3 weeks I've ever had in my life. Like, his goal was to try to get as many kids to quit as possible as a new college coach, because he didn't have a hand in any of the recruiting. So he just wanted to kind of wipe everyone out and start from scratch. But that's kind of what started the college career, and Doug did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, Evie, this is pretty interesting. First, how many times do we have people from Furman on, right? This is the second time.
Yeah.
Who else did you have?
We had Doug on.
Oh,
Well,
did
we had
you?
Doug on, and then we
I didn't know that.
Alec Cam on.
Okay,
Right,
and
that's
Alex
right,
too.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is three.
Small world. Small world.
Yeah.
Three
Very
Furman
small
guys.
Yeah, three Furman guys turning up the soccer scene.
Yeah.
Talk about, you say you went to 14 schools in a week. What other schools did you go to? And before you got to Furman, who would you say was, quote unquote, in first place?
That was a long time ago. So I know we hit all the big schools in like the Carolinas. So we looked at Duke, we looked at UNC, looked at James Madison, George Mason. I don't think we hit UVA. We hit like Wofford, Winthrop, Campbell, kind of some of those schools too, because we didn't know. I had no idea. I'd never looked into it. I didn't know what kind of campus I wanted to go to, if I wanted a big school, a small school. Before I started the whole process, I was convinced I wanted to go to Duke, and then John Rennie told me I was too small to ever make it as a collegiate goalkeeper. Not the first time I heard that. So I mean, looking back at it, it was probably JMU. James Madison was probably like my second choice at the time. I was being,
Martin.
I still,
guy.
he was fantastic. I still ran into him all the time. When I actually brought my daughter to visit there 5 years ago, he actually toured us around. He was like, it was fantastic.
Good guy.
So that I was also recruited by Loyola of Maryland, but didn't really know much about them, and we didn't visit them. But it was really one of those crazy things. And remember, back then we didn't have like Waze or Google Maps, so you called AAA and you said, "This is where I want to go," and you get the book.
The trip
You'd have to flip the page to get to the next one, and they would tell you what hotel to stay at and where to stop to eat and where to get gas. And I mean, it was completely, old school. But we just did it. And there's some schools you drive on the campus and be like, "Nope, let's keep going." And there were some schools that it's kind of cool, but it was. I never forget that feeling just driving in those front gates. And if you've ever been to Furman, it's an absolutely gorgeous campus. And you drive in the front gates, and there's a huge fountain and buildings. And like, I drove in, and I'm like, this is it. Looking back at it, I think I went to a high school with 200 kids, so I couldn't go to a big school. I would have been completely lost. So Furman really had everything I was looking for. I had no idea what kind of school it was academically, and I was way over my head. I don't know how I got in. I'm pretty sure nowadays I would never be able to get in, but it was, at the time, it worked out pretty well.
Who, we always ask, or a lot of times we ask, when you were younger, who was your influence as far as a goalkeeper? You mentioned to us, you started playing keeper 12, 13. As you got older, who were you being influenced by?
That's a really good question. So, back then it was really hard to watch international soccer. So a lot of what I knew was just what we could find around here. So it was some college soccer. It was some national team games every now and then. Every now and then you get a Premier League game, but that wasn't really until I got into college. So, I obviously liked Tony Meola because he was the national team keeper at the time, and that was really all I knew. I always went to Joe Matchnick's #1 goalkeeper camp, so you kind of got thrusted into, the world of goalkeeping back then. So, I liked some of those European keepers back in the day. Pfaff was one of my favorite. As I kind of got into college and started looking at some people and like watching how they played, I loved Oliver Kahn. When you go to Furman, I don't know if Doug touched on this, but you become a brainwashed Man United fan because even back then, like I said, we couldn't watch it on TV. So every road trip, all we watched was Man U highlights. And back then they were good. So every road trip, we're just watching Man U, Man U, Man U. So everybody became a Man U fan. And Schmeichel's still one of my favorite goalkeepers of all time. I think he was fantastic. I loved his personality, his presence. He made some ridiculous saves for the guy that he was. So he was one that I always loved. I'll still never forget watching UCLA in the Final Four. I can't remember if it was the finals or semifinals. And they go to a shootout, and Brad Friedel just stands in goal and wraps his hand around the crossbar without going on his tippy toes. And I'm like, I'm 5'10". I have to jump up to barely touch the crossbar. And here's a guy who's just wrapping his whole hand around the crossbar. And I was like, that's pretty cool. So I was always a big Friedel fan, too.
So let's talk a little bit about Furman. Did you realize that you were going to contend for the starting position your freshman year? The reason I asked that is you end up making all Southern Conference all 4 years at Furman. You're 3 times Conference Goalkeeper of the Year. You're Furman's Male Athlete of the Year in 1998. And I just want to hear what you thought going in, or what Doug told you at the start of preseason.
Yeah, so, that was one of the appealing things for me. The year before I got there, I think Furman only won it was either 7 or 8 games. They didn't have a very good season. And, being recruited, it was John Tart at the time. And he's like, I've got our starting keepers graduating. I've got a 5th-year senior coming in and a junior. And it's wide open for whoever comes in and wins the spot. And I'm just going to let people compete. And I'm like, great. Well, then he leaves and Doug comes in. And I actually think it probably worked in my benefit because, he was starting from scratch. He had no idea. So he's looking at the goalkeeper core and he's like, basically, whoever steps up to win this job is who I'm going with. And it was probably from his standpoint appealing to have someone who he knew was going to be there for 4 years. So the first time I met Doug was actually the day I reported for preseason. And that was kind of the conversation of listen, I'm new here, you're new here. For me, I need to put on the most competitive team. So if you come in and earn it, you're gonna play. Preface that to the summer before was actually when I met EV. So Al Pastor sent me down to Charlotte to live with Brian, his son, and basically it's like, I'm going to get you ready for college preseason. So we would train at 6 a.m. We would go for a run at noon, and then we would train at 6 p.m., and then we had all the physical work we had to do in between that he made you do. So, I spent a month of basically just getting myself in ridiculous shape to get ready to take any opportunity I had. So I took it pretty seriously. Up to that point, I had always played all the time. I had never had to be a backup. And if I ever had any sort of an issue, I would just kind of work my way through it and work harder to play better and, get the job. So I kind of went into it knowing that if I did what I had to do, I was pretty confident I'd be able to win it. And that was the message I got from the coaches. And that's how it happened. And then the 1 year I didn't get Conference Goalkeeper of the Year was my freshman year because Deegan took it from me. So
and
Alex Deegan.
David Davidson. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So he was a senior my freshman year.
And which is kind of strange because, as everybody knows, Deegan's not a giant guy either. Right? Mm-hmm. So you got 2 great goalkeepers, in it. I never understood when I was a coach when coaches would say, well, he's only, he's when Frank called me about Bushy, he's like, he might be 5'10", he might be, and I was like, I don't care, if it'll work, that's what you want to be. People are always, nowadays, and I'm sure you come across this too, Bonus. My son he wants to be a goalkeeper, but he's not very big. Yeah. I was like, yeah, but he's 75% there. If he wants to be a goalkeeper,
exactly.
He'll figure out a way to be a goalkeeper.
That is the most important thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So sorry.
I heard that, and I've had conversations with Bushy about it too, and it becomes motivation because you constantly have people telling you that you can't do it, right? And if you have the right personality and the right mentality, the more someone tells you can't do it, the more you're going to prove them wrong. I'll never forget my freshman year of high school, my health teacher was the varsity soccer coach. And we're going around class like, oh, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I'm like, well, I'm going to play professional soccer. And he like laughed at me. And when I got drafted, he was the first guy to send me a letter, like a handwritten letter, to be like, congratulations, that's awesome. I knew you were going to do it, like one of those. But that was the mentality back then, especially with a really short kid. And I mean, I was maybe $150 my freshman year. I was tiny. And I got the crap kicked out of me, especially when we played UNC Charlotte, because all those guys knew me from training with him. Grady Farmer destroyed me a couple times.
EV, let me ask you this. I mean, you trained Ronnie. What was he like?
He was a great goalkeeper. He was, as he just said, he was a hardworking kid. He did whatever you wanted him to do. He always showed up, smiling. And Bone, these. You worked at the Warren Wilson camps when we were up there, up in the mountains, which is somewhat cool, right? I mean, because it's up in the mountains, so at least nighttime is cool. This was in Charlotte, dude. I mean, it was 98 degrees and 100% humidity at 6 a.m. And and these, we put these guys through it, and I mean, he did what every goalkeeper coach wants. He worked his ass off. That's really all you want out of your kid, and and getting back to what Ronnie said to his health teacher, when I had, and I'm sure you do too, Greg, but and Ronnie does too, because he's coached, but you have kids that decide they want to be a pro. I always tell them, okay, say it out loud, right? If somebody asks you, you tell them that's what you're going to do, because if you keep it to yourself, it doesn't just happen, right? Being a pro doesn't just happen, right? You have to say, I'm going to be a professional I'm going to be a professional goalkeeper, and so, Ronnie was good. I mean, Ronnie was as good as any other goalkeeper of that era. Particularly in college, and then obviously, in the pros, because
I was going to ask you, Ronnie. So you get drafted by the Atlanta Silverbacks.
Yes, sir. So that was the first.
Yeah, people got to forget that. It was the A-League back then. You back up Bo Ashani, who obviously was a very good goalkeeper. So you get to play a whopping 2 games. Take us through the experience of getting drafted and what it meant, and then, quote unquote, having to sit the entire year basically before you move on.
Yeah, so it was, I was kind of fortunate in a couple of reasons, because back then, I mean, there were maybe a handful of kids that got drafted, and a majority of the kids that got drafted didn't sign with that team and didn't end up doing anything. So at the time, Furman had trimesters. So our second trimester was January, February, and then the third trimester was March, April, May. So I got drafted in February, and I wanted to get down there as soon as I could. So I was able to work it out where I did all independent studies that last trimester so I could live in Atlanta and still graduate, which was important to me. So I get drafted, and I go down there. Didn't know anything about anything at the time. They give me an apartment. I was making no money. Actually lived with Bo. Bo was a phenomenal guy. Looking back at it now, like, I was that kid who was like, I should be playing. And I look now and I'm like, there's no reason I should have been playing. Bo was amazing. Like, every game he would do something where you're just like, holy crap, did he really just do that? So it was a good experience for me. My first minutes as a pro, we were playing down in New Orleans. I think it was the New Orleans Storm, maybe was what they were called. But we're killing them. We're up like 7-0. So Nuno Patera was the coach. So he puts me in for the last 20 minutes. Well, the ref calls 2 penalties against us in those last 20 minutes. So my goals against average was like 12 because I let in 2 goals in 20 minutes. And after the game, the captain pulls the ref aside and is like, that's this guy's first pro minutes ever. And she's like, oh my God, if I knew that, I wouldn't have called either one of them. So I was like, fantastic. So I end up at the end of the season. I talked to Nuno and I'm like, listen, Bo's coming back. I really feel like I need to go somewhere where I've got an opportunity to play. And he's like, absolutely, I completely understand. I think it's great. I'll help you find a spot if you want. So it was, at the end of the day, it was a really good experience. It was a really good team because we had a lot of international guys and we had a lot of older veteran guys. So you got to like learn how to be a pro really quickly. And we were a very good team. Like, we played really good soccer. We played on an awful field in an awful stadium. But at the end of the day, it was a really cool experience. I would have liked to have played more, but I learned a ton from Bo about how to be a professional goalkeeper and, how to not just destroy your body every single day in training. One thing Evie did forget to mention, by the way, when we were doing that training in Charlotte and it was 98 degrees with 98% humidity both sessions, we had to wear the entire overall goalkeeper suit. That was long sleeves and long pants. You couldn't take it off until you had to put it on before you started and take it off when you were done. So, and back then it wasn't like the cool dry fit stuff you have now. It was like the thing that weighed 10 pounds before it got wet. And then you had to wear it and you start sweating right away and it ends up weighing like 40 pounds. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there.
But okay, that's true. But Ronnie, did I wear one too?
You absolutely did.
I did. I didn't jump around like you guys, but I was like, okay, if I'm making them wear long stuff, I got to wear long stuff too.
Just a mission.
I did it my entire career.
So
you take care of your body, right? You wear pants, you wear long sleeves when you need to, and you take care of your body. Well, sorry, I digress.
No, that's okay.
All good.
The funny thing is, Bushy did it through his whole career. Troy Perkins did it through his whole career. Yeah. William Hesmer did it through his whole career. Guys that, Mark Dodd did it through his whole thing. I mean, guys that I trained. And the reason for that was because, and we've all had them, right? You get a raspberry on your hip, right? You get, which was the worst because, guys, kids who are listening, we played on turf, but it wasn't really soft turf. It was, it was what I call Brillo turf, and you get, you wanted to look cool, so you wore shorts. Well, fuck that. You tore up your hips, right? And so I was like, okay, well, and then as a goalkeeper, as you know, even if you're like the toughest motherfucker walking the planet, if your left hip is all chewed up, I'm sorry. When it's time to dive to your left, you just a split second. I don't want to dive to my left, right?
Absolutely.
So that's what That's why I always made them. You got to wear long stuff when you train. If you want to warm up out of jogging and stuff, fine. But you jump in, that's when you got to wear long stuff. And I did that for 44 years. Coaching people, and that came from playing up in New York on Hofstra's Brillo, Home Depot green carpet over cement field, right?
The old Brillo pad.
Yeah. So sorry about that, but that. Well, like you said, you were in the best shape of ever, so you won the starting spot. Yeah.
And my body felt great, and everyone looked at me crazy when I go up to preseason in South Carolina wearing long pants to train. But it obviously worked.
Yeah.
So we Evie mentioned you played for the Richmond Kickers from 2000 to 2012. People sort of forget you had a cup of coffee with DC United. Tell us, that experience. How did it transpire?
Yeah, so basically we were, at the time, the Kickers were a farm team to DC United. So, we had a couple of their players who would come down on loan, and every now and then they would pull up a couple Richmond guys for training or whatever they needed. So I don't even remember what year it was, to be honest with you, but there was a hot minute where two of their keepers got hurt and they needed a backup. So I was driving, I'd get in my car in the morning, I'd drive up 95 to DC, I'd go to practice and I'd come home. Practice for a while, sat the bench for a couple games. I think I played in 2 scrimmages with them. One of them was at RFK. One of them was actually in Chicago after a first team game. And I thought I did pretty well. But nothing ever really came from that. I think they knew I was pretty happy in Richmond. And the stories I've heard afterwards, the Kickers were asking a pretty hefty penny for me because I was under contract with. So it never really worked out. But, fortunately for me, I played my first 2 years in Richmond, 2000 and 2001. And like I said, I didn't really start at the beginning. It took me a while. And those off seasons, I was actually going back to Furman in the off season to coach. Doug Matt had me on as like a volunteer assistant, and it was an opportunity to stay with the guys and train. One of my best friends from college was one of the assistant coaches at the time too, Ryan Higginbotham. So, I was able to kind of like hang out, stay involved, stay fit, and do coaching. So then I made the decision in 2002 when I signed a 3-year contract with Richmond, and I was going to move up to Richmond full time. That was going to be kind of where I was for a while once I knew that I'd have an opportunity to play. And that summer is the summer I ended up meeting my wife, who I'm still married to now. So it kind of worked out. They always say things work out the way you want them to. So at the time when I was going up to DC, I was dating my future wife, and I kind of knew pretty quickly before her I never dated anyone more than 8 weeks because they would do something that would drive me crazy. So once she made that 8 weeks mark, I was like, all right, this is the one.
C-bone, and it all started with long gear and training. See, there you go.
Never would have happened without it.
Yeah.
So it was cool, and I went up there a couple other times just to kind of like sit the bench and kind of fill in at moments. But I never, in my mind, I never really got the opportunity I was looking for at that other level. We played, I think it was 2002 maybe. We played Columbus in the Open Cup, and we ended up losing, but I did pretty well. And Bushy was the goalkeeper at the time for Columbus, and the coach was like, we need another goalkeeper. I'd love to have you, but they would kill me if I had 2 keepers under 6 foot. And I'm like, okay, understandable. So it was always one of those things where it just never really worked out. But, Richmond became my home. I'm still living in Richmond now. I actually got recognized in the grocery store the other night, which doesn't happen very often anymore. But some lady comes up to me and is like, weren't you the Kickers goalie? And I'm like, yep, that was me. So it ended up being a pretty cool experience and a much better career than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, it was 2001, by the way. Who was the coach of DC United, and who was the starting goalkeeper back then?
But I knew you were going to ask me that. Tom Prestis.
Yeah,
was the starting goalkeeper once. I remember there was one game after the game. I go in and I'm peeing, and he comes in and I'm like, hey, good stuff tonight. He's like, not really. If I keep playing like that, you're going to steal my spot. And I'm like, okay. Like, I didn't know what to say. I'm sitting there like at the urinal peeing, and he's like, I'm like, all right, I thought you did okay. Yeah, I can't remember what goalkeepers got injured or anything like that. Or honestly, I don't even remember who the coach was back then. I feel like Thomas Rongen. Was he ever coaching DC United?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might have been Thomas.
Yes.
So
let's get into the Kickers. You mentioned 2002. That's the year they get to the finals, but lose. 2005, they get to the finals and lose.
I told you,
2006, they do win it, and you are named goalkeeper of the year. Another great thing happens then. Your son is born. So tell us, because it was all like in a week, all this stuff was going on. The championship game, your son being born. Just what a eventful week.
Yeah, so I'll back up 9 months. So I get married in October of 2005. So right after we lose, like literally a week after we lose to Seattle, where I can get into this story later, but I basically missed the penalty kick to lose the championship for us. There's a lot more that goes into it. It sounds a lot better when I tell the whole story, but we'll just go with that. So I get married in October. We decide we're going to try to. My wife had a 2-year-old when I met her, so we had a daughter, but we decided to try to have kids. The doctor's like, "Oh, you've been on birth control for years. It's going to take a while. Don't worry about it happening anytime soon." Well, literally, I think it was like 3 days after we start trying, she ends up getting pregnant. So
See?
we
Well,
tried to
goalies.
space it out. I mean, we tried to
goalies.
space it out. We tried to space it out so that if he was born, it would be after the season. Well, that doesn't work out. So she's very, very pregnant all during the summer, and we keep winning our playoff games, and it gets to a point where it's like she's really, really, really pregnant, and the finals are in a week. So we talked to the doctor. The doctor's like, we can induce anytime. So we're like, okay, let's get on the schedule. We'll try to get induced at the beginning of the week, because the worst thing that could happen is if it happens like Friday before the finals. Not saying my son and wife aren't important, but it is the finals, right? So Monday we don't get the call. Tuesday we don't get the call. So Tuesday night we're like, and it goes by like if they've got room in labor and delivery, they'll call you if you're on the list for induction, for being induced. So Tuesday night we're like, listen, if it doesn't happen, tomorrow, then we'll just scrap it and sit with your legs crossed and hope nothing happens until after the finals. Well, Wednesday morning, of course, the phone rings. So he's born on a Wednesday. I missed practice Wednesday. I missed practice Thursday. My wife still gives me shit about it. I pick her up from the hospital Friday. I drop her and my son off at our house, and I go to practice because it was the last practice before the finals. So I go to practice, and then the finals were Saturday. Wow. So I play in
let
the
me
finals.
just say right here. Let me just say right here. We've had a lot of good goalkeepers on. We've had a lot of good players and coaches on. However, I don't think I hands down, Ronnie Pascale is the bravest man we've ever had on this show. Ever.
And I'll take that. Yeah. I missed the awards dinner. I missed like all the stuff. I went to practice the night before the finals. So we end up playing the finals, and again, like I mean, when you experience your child being born, it's just a really weird experience, and it just absolutely destroys you. So the night before, he slept in bed with us, so I didn't sleep at all, not taking care of myself, go to the finals, and I'll never forget it. We make it through the first half. Second half starts. We're like 10 minutes in. A low shot right at me. I go down, do a forward dive, and when I go to my forward dive, both calves cramp up. And I'm like, oh, shit, this is going to be a really long half. So I kind of like shake them out. I start stretching them and stuff, and we end up making it through and winning. And according to my son, he's the reason why we won our first championship.
Gotcha.
So, all right. Does he claim the second championship in 2009 or not?
Well, of course, because if we didn't win the first one, we won the second one, and the only reason we won the first was because of him. He doesn't claim the loss in 2007, but he does claim the win in 2009.
Damn kids.
Always, right?
Yeah. I don't know if you're an avid listener to the program, but you did touch on a subject that we all sort of get excited about, the U.S. Open Cup.
Oh, here we go.
So you played in it. So we want you to tell us your experience of it because, in 2011, you beat two MLS teams back to back. You beat Columbus 2-1, and then you beat Sporting KC 2-0. And people forget that was their first loss in their stadium ever. So take us through some of these moments, and then, here at the end of that, tell us your emergency story.
So the Open Cup was always like one of my favorite events of the year. And it's anytime you have a chance, we're always the underdog, we're the minor league team, but whenever you have a chance to play an MLS team, you're gonna play a little bit better, right? And at the time, in the early 2000s, at the beginning of my Kickers career, we had a lot of guys who probably could have played in MLS, who just for one reason or another chose not to. So we always were, one of those teams that could knock off the bigger team and knock off the MLS team. And, we beat DC United a couple times. We beat Chicago a couple times. It was really, really cool. So 2011 was a pretty special one because I knew I was getting kind of to the end of my career. And we had a pretty good team, but at the time we were like 2 notches below MLS. So nobody really gave us a chance. We end up going up to Columbus, and we beat them 2-1. Then the game in Kansas City was pretty cool because it, like you said, they were on like a 12-game unbeaten streak at their home stadium. You know, they just opened it. It was called, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it on the show, Live Strong Park, because of Lance Armstrong back in the day. So, you know, it was kind of a fortress, right? So they were known for being that team. So we set up. We knew that they were a lot bigger and faster and more athletic than us. So we just kind of sat in the first half, and our whole goal was make it to halftime at 0-0 and maybe sneak a chance on the counterattack. Then we'll reevaluate in the second half. So we ended up doing that. They didn't have a ton of good chances. And they had a really good team back then too in 2011. Come out at halftime, and you know, we start kind of coming after them a little bit and playing a little bit better soccer. And then about 15-20 minutes in, there's a lightning delay. And we had, in the month before that game, we probably had 3 or 4 games that got paused by lightning delays. Like that was something that happened in our league all the time. And they had no idea what they were doing because it didn't really happen in MLS. So we come out from the lightning delay and we score like a minute into it to go up 1-0. And all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, they're gonna try, right? They start putting some of their starters in and they really start coming at us. And we just kind of held in. We were a super strong team defensively. And then snuck a penalty at the end of the game to end up winning 2-0. So being in the turf industry a couple years later, there was actually a project in Kansas City. So I go out there and I knew John Pascarella pretty well, who was the goalkeeper coach for Sporting at the time. So John's like, oh, you know, come by, I'll bring you by the facility. You can, you know, kind of check everything out. So we're talking, we go into his office, and Peter Vermes is there, the coach. And he's like, hey, Peter, you know, this is Ronnie Pascale. You know, oh, he was the goalkeeper for the Kickers when they beat us in our stadium in the Open Cup. And Peter just looks at me, and like his expression just drops. And I'm like, all right, I'll see you later. And just kind of walked out. But it was like, I mean, he's still like the anger he had from losing to us. It was like 2 or 3 years later. I was like, all right, that's kind of cool. And then that was the quarterfinal. So then the semifinals, we played Chicago in Chicago. It turns out we were the first lower division team to beat 2 MLS teams on the road ever in the Open Cup, which was pretty cool. Then we play at Chicago in the semifinal. And that was probably the best game that we played. They called a bogus penalty in the first half. And then they scored on a counterattack in the second half, and we lost 2-1. But that was probably the game that we deserved to win more than the first 2. But the Open Cup was always awesome. I had a really cool – we played LA Galaxy, and it was like 3 weeks after they announced David Beckham was signing for him.
Whoa.
So our stadium was packed because everyone thought Beckham was going to be there. Like, and they'd even said, like, you know, he's not coming for a couple months, but they thought like, oh, he's going to come and watch the team play in Richmond, which we all know that's not going to happen. But Landon Donovan was on the team. So Landon doesn't start. We're up, we score a goal in the first half to go up 1-0. They put Landon in the second half. And it's towards the end of the game. We're still up 1-0, and they play a long ball over the top. And I know it's going to hit and skip. And Landon's just kind of watching over the shoulder as the ball comes. So I come out, and I time it perfectly, knee up, 2 hands right over his head to punch the ball, knee right in his chest, and just destroy him. Absolutely lay him out like a great hit, like a great goalkeeper hit, right? So he's sitting on the ground, and he, you know, eventually stands up, and like 30 seconds later, they blow the whistle for the end of the game. So he sits right back down. So I go up to him and I tap him on the shoulder. I'm like, hey, man, you all right? And he looks at me, gets up and walks away and doesn't say a word. And I'm like, oh, that was kind of weird, you know, maybe a little bit odd. He's probably mad he lost the game, but I don't think anything else of it. So at City Stadium, it's kind of a horseshoe where all the fans stand and where all the fans sit. So after the game, you go up to the horseshoe and there's a wall and you sign autographs for the kids. So I'm up there signing autographs, and all these kids are like, dude, Landon Donovan totally snubbed you. And I'm like, yeah, he did. What a jerk. And I start getting all like worked up about it too. But it was a fun one to kind of play those games and to play against guys that, you grow up watching play and just having that opportunity.
Yeah. Tell us about, like I mentioned, the emergency that you had to perform at the U.S. Open Cup, in 2016.
Oh, that's what you were talking about?
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Where I quote unquote came out of retirement.
Yes, exactly.
So I was doing the club a favor, and I signed 4 years after I retired to be a backup. I didn't play. I didn't get on the field at all, but I did sit the bench for a couple games. One of the games I actually sat the bench for was against Crystal Palace, a scrimmage against Crystal Palace that the Kickers actually won. And Lee looks at me with like 10 minutes to go, and he's like, "You want to go in?" I go, "Absolutely not." He's like, "All right." So yeah, and then even after that, I think it was 2 years later, one of my really good friends, David Bulow, got the head coaching job for the Kickers when Lee was going to step down. So Bulow calls me up, and this is, kind of end of the summer. And he's like, "Dude, I got a huge favor to ask of you." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "I don't want to be that asshole first-year coach who, doesn't have enough keepers on the roster. The roster freezes Friday. I've only got 2 goalkeepers. Can I sign you, just in case anything happens for the rest of the season?" I'm like, "Dude, I don't know. I'm old. I've been retired for a while. I don't play anymore." I was like, I don't know. He's like, "Please." He's like, "We'll keep it secret. We won't say anything to anyone. Just, please, can we do it?" And I'm like, "You know what? For you, I'll do it, but please keep it quiet." He's like, "Absolutely." So I sign all the paperwork. The roster freezes that Friday night. Well, Saturday morning, I had to go out to Colorado for work. So I get on the plane super early, land in Denver, turn on my phone, and it's just blowing up with text messages. "I can't believe you re-signed. Are you playing in the game tonight? I can't wait to watch you play again." And I pull up, and there's this big article, "Pascale re-signs with the Kickers," with a picture of me on it. And I'm like, "You dick." Basically, what he did was, so at the time, we were babysitting. My wife was babysitting his son, and Dave's a big Arsenal fan. So I got video of his son saying, "Boo Arsenal, go Man U." So his payback for me doing that to his son was doing this huge press release and throwing it out there that I'd re-signed with the Kickers.
Oh,
So
wow.
What a story.
fun times.
What was it like playing for Lee Kalshaw? You played for a time, Tell us, when you first started playing for him, what was it like? And then obviously you've also been in the booth as a broadcaster, and so you got to see that angle. So again, maybe the maturing of Lee might be a good thing to talk about, if that's
absolutely. So
say.
My first year in Richmond was 2000, and 99 Lee played on the Kickers, and then 2000 he became head coach. So, my first year with the Kickers was Lee's first year as a coach. So I'd say we both matured quite a bit in the 13 years I played for him. But it was an interesting dynamic because, one of the cool things about the Kickers was they always had a big core of players that came back. So that first year, probably 70% of the team had been Lee's teammate the year before. And you've got guys who are Lee's age or older who had played with him who now are expected to listen to him as a head coach. So it was just a really interesting dynamic. One thing I'll say about Lee that he's got to get credit for is he knew how to win. He knew how to put players together and to attract the right type of players and how to put a team together that worked really well together to get the best out of what you needed to do. We never had the best budget in the league. From what I was always told, we were always one of the lowest budgets in the league. But the 13 years I played for Richmond, we only missed the playoffs one time, and that was 2004. It was pretty incredible who was able to be successful year in and year out and just find a way to win. We always had really good players, but just kind of watching Lee develop and the way that he coached and the way that he was able to, communicate with players and talk to players and change strategies. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. You always had those quote unquote experiments that went pretty bad in the first 20 minutes that you'd have to change. But for the most part, you look at what he did with the Kickers organization, with the resources he had, the budget he had, to put a team out there that, the 10 years I was a starter, we made the championship game 5 times. That's pretty incredible. So, he was a good coach. He understood the game. Like I said, it was always, for me, which I appreciated as a goalkeeper, is always defense first. So it was always a very defensive oriented strategy and game plan. But he was really, it was pretty cool to watch how he developed and how he kind of matured and how he kind of, I don't want to say relaxed, but as he became more confident and more relaxed and more comfortable in what he was doing, to see the way players reacted to him. But, the one thing that I always liked about Lee was he was able to identify talent. We always had a player combine every year in the off season. And that's where he signed me. We picked up a guy named Clyde Sims, who ended up going on and having a really good career in MLS and with the national team. A guy named Tim Brown, who ended up playing for the New Zealand national team and having a really good career. He actually is the guy who started Allbirds, the shoe company. He played for the Richmond Kickers,
for New Zealand. Yes.
Yeah.
New Zealand.
Believe it or not, he had the largest big toe ever. His big toe was enormous. And I'm convinced that's why he started Allbirds, because he couldn't find a freaking shoe that would fit his big toe.
Yeah.
So he had to do something different. Matt Watson, who's another guy who played in the USL Championship and was a phenomenal player, was a guy we picked up at the Combine. So we had a really good knack for talent and a way to kind of bring in players and manipulate contracts and coaching and things like that, to kind of make things work. But, the thing I loved about Richmond and the Kickers was it really was like a community-first club. All the guys who played coached. We constantly were doing appearances and doing things out in the community and getting the kids involved, because we knew if the kids wanted to come in the games, they were going to bring their parents too.
Yeah. I don't think you can leave out, when you say the Richmond Kickers, it's almost synonymous with the UCrop group.
Yeah.
Talk a little, I think there's a lot of rumors and myths. You guys didn't have to do camps because you guys were working in the grocery store, and the budget was low because you guys were all making money working in the grocery store. So either keep the myths going, root out some of this mess, the chaos, but again, on a serious note, I mean, what can you say about the community that they gave back to soccer? What a phenomenal, contribution.
Yeah, and I've been fortunate enough to, I call Rob one of my best friends. Fortunate enough to know his parents really well and their whole family and Rob's siblings. Rob's brother, Jeff, was actually a senior at Furman my freshman year, which he didn't play soccer, but I remember the banner in the dining hall because he was running for student body president. So I remember the Jeff Ucrop thing. And again, Furman was a small school, so everyone kind of knew everyone. So, I was fortunate enough to really get to know their family, and what Mr. Ucrop and Mr. Rip did. It was, the co-owners of the Kickers back then were Bobby Ucrop and Dick Rip. Dick Rip was a restaurateur. He owned a lot of the local Arby's in Richmond. And just what they were able to do to kind of sustain this club that probably wasn't making them a lot of money. I will dispel the myth. My 13 years with Richmond, nobody I knew that I played with actually worked at Ucrops. We all went there all the time. I do. So my first year, it was 2000. We had Dwayne DiRosario on the team. So we played a 4-5-1, which was basically 9 people sitting behind the ball, and you'd kick it long to Dwayne and let Dwayne try to do something. But we start the season 1-4, and then we end up going on this 12-game unbeaten streak. So 7 or 8 games into this winning streak, we come into the locker room for a home game, and everyone's got an envelope on their chair. And we're like, this is kind of cool. What is this? So we open it up, and it's a letter from Bobby Ucrop and Dick Rip. hey, we're really proud of you guys. Keep it up. You really turned it around. Everyone's really excited about the season. Here's a little something for you to say thank you. It was 2 coupons for free Arby's roast beef sandwiches.
Yes.
And that was our big mid-year bonus. It's like, here's a coupon for a roast beef sandwich. Go ahead.
We have the meats.
It's the coolest non-soccer part about being a part of the Kickers. So I think it was Dick Rips. I don't think it was Mr. Ukrops, but Dick Rip, in our office, there was a little garage in the back, and you go back there and you pull up the tarp, and it's an old car with bullet holes in it. It was actually the car from Godfather 2 where, what's his face? I can't remember his brother, but Michael Corleone's brother drives up to the toll booth and gets shot.
Sonny.
Yeah, it was that car, the car that had all the bullet holes in it. Like, he had bought it at auction, and it was sitting in the garage at the Kickers office for years.
Wow.
And I was like, that is so cool. Yeah, so what Mr. Ukrop was able to do, and the Ukrop family was phenomenal. Rob stepping back in and buying the club. So I don't know if you guys know, but Rob basically was at a Davidson soccer reunion, and he was talking to a bunch of his teammates, and they were like, hey, we all get along, we like each other, some of us have been pretty successful, what can we do? And Rob's like, I have this crazy idea, and ended up basically forming a company called 22 Holdings. I say it was the number 22 because that was my number, so he kind of named it after me. It turns out it was the 22 feet from the 11 soccer players on the field together, which makes more sense, but I like my version better. Anyway, so they bought the club, so they now own the Richmond Kickers Pro Club, and it's separate from the youth club. Unfortunately, they bought the club right when the pandemic hit. So they had the club for about 6 months, and then COVID hit. So the fact that they were able to kind of dig in and keep the club surviving when they were making zero money is incredible, and it speaks volumes about Rob and what his intentions are. And they've done a phenomenal job. Like, if you look at attendance of the Richmond Kickers right now, we'd be one of the top 5 teams in USL Championship. We're constantly selling out. We've got huge fan base. The River City Red Army is absolutely incredible. I don't know if you guys have seen a Kickers game on TV, but you go to the corner, it's called the Red Army, and they're just phenomenal. They're waving flags and beating drums and smoke bombs, and it's such a cool atmosphere to go to these games now. So I look back at it and I'm like, man, if we had that when we were playing, that would have been fantastic. But it's cool to see how it's kind of developed in this city.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Virginia Commonwealth, where you've been coaching in and out. You were the goalkeeper coach from 2002 to 2007. Sort of took a little hiatus, come back in 2019 as a volunteer. I'd love to hear what that means these days. So, do you enjoy that role of just working with the goalkeepers versus the whole team?
Yeah. So, back in the day, I don't know if you know, but when I played professional soccer, we did not get paid much money at all. It was really like you're playing for the love of the game. And
absolutely.
I talked to Rob recently, and now USL Division I, which is where the Kickers are, has a minimum salary, and the minimum salary that these guys, the lowest paid player on the team, makes more in a year playing soccer than I did when I was at the pinnacle of my career. So just to kind of put things in perspective nowadays, so we always had to do something else to supplement our income. So I had not only coached for the Kickers Youth Club, but back from 02 to 07, I was a full-time assistant at VCU with the men and the women. So it worked out well because when I started it was one of my teammates, Chris Brown, and his wife, Denise, who were co-head coaches with the women's side. And Tim O'Sullivan was a head coach on the men's side, who was an awesome guy. So it worked out really well. I got to a point after my son was born in 2007, 2008, where I was like, I'm playing professional soccer. I'm coaching with the Kickers Youth Club. I'm a full-time assistant for 2 teams collegiately. Like, I leave my house at 8 a.m., I get home at 10 p.m., I don't see my kids, and we're not making a lot of money. Like, I need to make a change. So I always thought I was going to be a college coach forever. Like, I thought I was going to play soccer and coach, and that was going to be my career. College coaches don't make a lot of money unless you're doing a really good job and you get an opportunity at a big school. So it got to a point where I'm like, I need to do something different. So it was one of those kind of, again, one of those funny, weird timing things where my wife and I have a conversation of like, I've got to get out of college coaching and I have to find something else to do, like a quote unquote real job. And 2 days later, the phone rings in my office at VCU. It's a recruiting service. And they're like, hey, we've got this turf company who's looking for someone based out of Richmond who's got a soccer background. Are there any seniors who are graduating who would be interested? And I'm like, I think I might know a guy. So I end up like getting the information and calling, and yeah, I'm like, okay, I'll do this for a year and then I'll figure out what I really want to do. And that was 15 years ago, and I'm still in the turf industry. So it was hard to walk away from the college coaching because I always loved coaching and I still do, especially at that level. Like it's a pretty high level. So, fast forward, 2013, VCU hires David Gifford on the men's side, and his assistant is Brett Teach. Well, Teach was an assistant coach, was the head coach at Georgia State when I was at Furman, and he used to come up and work the Furman camps. And so I've known him since I was like 19 years old. So I had met Giff a couple times too, just being in the industry, and he was a goalkeeper. So, when Giff got to Richmond, he reached out and he's like, would you have any interest in helping? And I'm like, I don't have any time. And every time I would see him, he'd be like, hey, do you want to help? Do you want to help? I can't do it. So I don't even know where I was, but I was talking to Teach one day, and he's like, listen, dude, like, we just want you involved. We just want you around the guys. Like, no commitment whatsoever. If you could show up to practice, great. If you could show up to games, great. If you can't, no big deal. Is that something you might be interested in? And I'm like, you know what? I think I might, because I hadn't coached for a while at that point, and I really had the bug. So that's what I ended up doing. I think I started in, you said 2019 as like a volunteer assistant coach. And basically it's, show up to practice when you can. If you can, it's no big deal. Show up to games if you can, but just try to be around the guys and try to, coach the goalkeepers and help them out as much as you can and instill some wisdom because you're an old guy now. So I've been doing that for a while. Fortunately, I was able to be pretty involved this last season, which was a lot of fun. So that's kind of what my role is. It's not like an official role. And I have a lot of people who reach out to me like, I see you're a coach at VCU. Can you do this? And I'm like, nope, I can't. So it's fun. And I love it. I've recently gotten kind of back into coaching again. I do like coaching teams, but there's something about just training goalkeepers at a high level when you can kind of control not control, but you can have input and influence in their mentality and their work ethic and the way they go about doing things. And, there's a lot of, I call it, Evie, I'm sure you can kind of relate to this, but a lot of this kind of new age goalkeeping out there. And there's something to be said for just, as Bushy says, the meat and potatoes, right? It's the basic technique. It's putting your head down. It's working through things. It's just, you put in the work and good things are going to happen if you're doing it the right way, right? So focus on the basics, get that down pat, and just do things the way they're supposed to be done. And I love that mentality, and I like being able to instill that into the guys.
Wow.
Sorry
for that, EV. I might have to turn this back over to you. I love the ending right there, Ronnie. I thought that was spot on.
I think that's what you do when you're I can tell you that's what you do because everybody who's here and everybody who's probably listening, that's what happens when you love the game. You love the game and you want, you may go do other stuff, but you want to be around the game, and so, yeah, I mean, that's, and Greg, you and I have talked about this a billion times, you're a goalkeeper, right? And all the new age stuff is wonderful, but your first job is keep the ball out of the goal.
Yep.
And I mean, can you play with your feet? Probably not as well as you can keep the ball out of the goal, right? And if you get a guy who's really great with his feet, but he has a hard time keeping the ball out of the goal and a guy who keeps the ball out of the goal but's not so hot with his feet, that guy's going to play first, because that's your job, And if you can find a guy that's both, great, And as goalkeeper coaches, we try to develop players that can do both. But, your first job as a goalkeeper is, I always tell my goalkeepers, there's 3 things you do. Keep the ball out of the goal. Catch it if you can catch it, okay? Because then we have the ball, right? And then this is really important. Once you have the ball, don't give it back to the other team, And if you can do those 3 things, you're probably going to do okay,
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's it's not rocket surgery, pal. It's just keep do what you're supposed to do,
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I always say there's, for me, when I'm looking at kids and you're looking at goalkeepers and evaluating talent, whether it's recruiting or just kind of watching, for me, there's 3 types of goalkeepers, right? There's goalkeepers that make a lot of mistakes and they're going to lose you a game. There's goalkeepers that aren't going to make a lot of mistakes, but they're not going to make any great saves and they're not going to win it. They won't lose a game for you, but they won't win it. And then there's those keepers that are going to win a game for you, right? Where they're not going to make the mistake and they're going to do 1 or 2 things in a game that you're like, holy crap, that's a game-saving save.
Yeah.
Right? So it's how do we develop these goalkeepers to be able to do that, right? Not on a consistent basis, but on a consistent basis. And it's building habits so that you don't have to think about it. So you've got to do things the right way. You've got to get set the right way so that you don't need to spend half a second thinking, okay, I've got to get set. It just happens.
Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
you take a power step and dive. You don't dive to your right off your left foot. You take a step with your right leg and you get power and you cover the entire goal. It's the basic stuff that for me, it's basics, but kids don't do it anymore. And it's like, you look at some of these goalkeeper coaches that make a lot of money and it's like, what are they doing?
Yeah.
There was a guy I was watching and he put goalkeepers through a session in August in Richmond and the keepers walk off the field and they're barely broke a sweat. And I'm like, that's not right. Like there's something, you can't do that. Right.
Yeah.
I was telling my VCU keepers, like my job is to make practice as uncomfortable as possible because that's supposed to be the hard part and the game's supposed to be easy.
Right.
Like anything that you see in a game should be easy because practice was a lot harder.
Right.
And that's what we've got to do. It's not taking it easy on you and rainbows and unicorns. It's put you in a hard spot because goalkeeping is a really specific position.
Yeah.
Right. And it's totally different.
Yeah. But before, I'm gonna ask Ryan. I'm sure he's got some questions. Let's go back to the U.S. Open Cup. What do you think needs to happen to make this bigger? And I'll give you, again,
Gotta
on the
steal
show.
question number 1, don't you, Greg?
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah. My answer is put $1 million for the prize money, right? Instead of $300,000, because that will make, I hope, an MLS team go, okay, $1 million, $700,000 more. I think we can play some starters, right? Okay. So Now there's a lot more at stake now because if you win, you go to this championship and you finish runner-up, you qualify and things like that. But I think the magnitude, I think we all do on the show, feel you put $1 million up, we're going to have some bigger sponsors. Now, who that sponsor is for the $1 million, I don't know, but that's not my job. That's U.S. Soccer's job. So what are your thoughts?
I've kind of been struggling with this one for a while because, again, I look at it, and back in the early 2000s, MLS teams took it seriously. They wanted to win the Open Cup. And somewhere along the way, it kind of lost its luster, and I don't know how or why. But, you look at the FA Cup, and you've got teams who are, these Premier League teams are starting their good guys against lower division teams now because they don't want to lose, right? It's a chance to win another trophy. So I don't know where things got kind of lost, where MLS teams all of a sudden don't care about winning another trophy when they should be, especially you've got clubs who have struggled notoriously in the MLS season. Why don't you try to win a trophy somewhere where you can? You get a group like FC Cincinnati where they just need to win any trophy. So I'm just saying next I see Ryan's flag in the background.
Champions.
Oh, yeah.
If we weren't in the United States, that trophy would be more important.
It's true. Yeah. So I honestly, I don't know what the answer is. I like the idea of making it a really big prize. I thought giving the winner a slot in the CCL or whatever it's called would be a little bit more enticing than it is. But then you listen to some of these MLS coaches talking and they're complaining about playing too many games.
Fixture
right?
congestion is the argument, right?
Yeah, it's you look at what these Premier League guys are doing, and you look at MLS teams, and it's like nothing, but they're still complaining about it. So, I don't know.
I think there's a lot to do with travel, though, too, as part of our problem. So when you talk about MLS teams competing in these events, and I'm a big fan of MLS teams going and playing in the smaller arenas to give the lower level teams a chance to sell out their venue. And show up for, as an FC Cincinnati fan, like when we were in the USL playing in the 2018, Open Cup and making that run, like that made a big difference. It put Cincinnati on the map as a soccer destination,
Right.
I mean, yes, MLS was already having conversations with ownership here, but that really showed MLS like, hey, this place is legit. Like they'll come out, they'll show up. But I think you've got the CONCACAF Champions League now. You've got the Leagues Cup. They've made so many additional events for teams that it doesn't make the Open Cup as important because they can make more money with the television revenue from these other events.
Exactly.
So how does U.S. Soccer go about selling the Open Cup rights to someone and making the money back? I think is the ultimate question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunately at the end of the day, it all comes down to money. But we always talked about it like internally. If we got to host an MLS team, we knew the crowd was going to be amazing, and if we had to go play in an MLS stadium, we knew the atmosphere was going to suck. There would be, 1,000.
Yeah, even now, the FC Cincinnati games when like Pittsburgh came here to play, and it was not a good turnout.
Right, and if that game was at Pittsburgh, it would have been sold out, and the atmosphere would have been phenomenal. Right, so it's like, and I know it sucks for these higher division teams to have to go to these lower division ones, and being a Man U fan, we just had to go to. I think it was Notts County, and the stadium was, bad, and the field was horrendous. But for those fans, it was like a once in a lifetime thing to see their team play Man U, right? So,
Luton Town's in the Prem now, so you can't complain about where else you're going.
That's a good point. It's I don't know, and it's hard to sit back and when it happened and I read that thing about MLS, they're only going to put their MLS 2 teams in. I was pissed. I was absolutely furious that they would make that decision, right? And
I wish you had been with all of us when that news hit.
Yeah, I could only imagine.
We were all right there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody was. It's like, who do these guys think they are? Like, I don't know. It was just, it was weird. I think the Open Cup could be a phenomenal tournament. I just, maybe they wait a couple more rounds to put MLS teams in. So I don't know how they do it, but there's got to be some way to make it more valuable and more important for these MLS teams.
All right. Evie, you want to add anything? Brian, you got any more questions?
No, I was passing some along to you as we were going. I think you covered most of them. I think for me, the Open Cup was kind of the biggest thing just because I know Ronnie had quite a bit of experience playing in it. So, that's always been a hot button issue on this show. And, I think the interesting part for me is just knowing the history of the Richmond Kickers, and Ronnie was there for a lot of it. And now that they're down a division essentially from where they were. That 2018 season was rough for them. That was They finished 31st amongst teams in the USL Championship.
Yeah.
And that was really probably what I would say is the low point of the Kickers.
Yeah, it's I don't want to be that guy who like sits up in the stand and is like, oh, back in my day we were so much better. But the way I try to explain it to people is like, so when we were playing back in my day, like I don't want to say it, but I'll say it. Back in my day, MLS had 16 teams, right? And then our league had 20 teams, right? So you think about the player pool. You've got 16 MLS teams, and then you've got 20 lower division teams. So we're getting those players who are in teams 17 to 37, right? So that pool of players. Well, now MLS has 30 teams. USL Championship has 30-something teams. And USL Division 1 is 12 teams.
Right.
So now all of a sudden our player pool is down 60-something teams, right? And if every team has 30 players, that's 1,800 players, right? So our player pool goes from being the number 300 player in the country to the number 1,800 player in the country. So the quality and the level isn't going to be the same as it was back then. It's hard. The whole league has developed and has changed, and it's not what it used to be. But the fact that there's still professional soccer and it's exploding in certain areas is really cool. I talk to people, the number of teams that would pop up and be a pro team for a year or two and then disappear was shocking. We kind of joke around when I'm talking to some of my old teammates about, remember the year we had to do this and the year we had to do that. And I think it was Nashville. We played a game in Nashville where the referee actually shielded Dwayne DeRosario from the ball. Like someone tried to clear the ball, it hit the ref, it dropped to Dwayne, and the ref steps in front of Dwayne and actually shields him from getting the ball. We're like, what the hell just happened? It was at a high school field in Nashville, Tennessee. So, you go through and that team lasted a year. The stories of guys who didn't get their paychecks. Like I only had one paycheck issue in my 13 years with the Kickers. And this was back when we got paper paychecks. And we get our checks, and Jesse Myers was the assistant coach, and I'm driving home, and he calls me. He's like, hey, have you cashed your check yet? I go, no. He goes, okay, well, I've got good news and bad news for you. I go, well, what's that? He goes, well, you can't cash that check, but if you did, you'd be set for a while. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, there was a computer glitch. So everybody's salary, like everybody else got zeros, and you got everyone's. So I open up the check, and it's like a $99,000 paycheck. And I'm like, this is fucking awesome. I took a photocopy
took a picture of it.
I'm like,
yeah,
it was a lot better than those stupid coupons.
Yeah,
highest paid player in USL ever.
I made jack when I played. It was awesome. They're gonna be like, well, why do we live in the shack then? But yeah, so that was the only time, and it was just a purely a computer glitch. So the fact that I was able to sign with this club that had history and had stability, and we never had to worry about paychecks, and they always gave us other opportunities, whether it was youth coaching or camps or whatever it was, and being in the community and just having that reputation, it was really cool to see. And we want the Kickers to get back there. Like everybody you talk to wants to see the Kickers back up at that upper echelon of soccer. Whether they move up to the USL Championship or not, I honestly don't care. I don't think most Richmond fans care. They just want to see a competitive team that can win, right?
Well, and there's some quality clubs in League One now.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Charlotte's there, right?
Yeah.
Forward Madison, Chattanooga Red Wolves.
Yeah.
One Knox is a pretty cool team to watch. We've had a guest on from Lexington SC.
Yeah.
And then you've of course got Tormenta, who seems to be everybody's darling. But there's 4 more expansion teams coming within the next few years. You've got Brooklyn, Santa Barbara, Naples, and then Portland, right?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, from what I understand, it was kind of sold as being USL 1 is going to be more of a regional league, and it's going to be kind of set up into regions. And like every time there's an expansion team, it's like California, Colorado, Naples, Florida. It's like not anywhere close to where we are. But I think
they have to, because they've got. I mean, they've got some out west that need somebody semi close. They've got to start cutting down some of that travel time. Yeah, it's like the old PDL or USL2 now, but like Texas has like 10 teams, and they play in a Texas division.
Yeah,
and they're still traveling 5 hours to go play somebody.
Yeah.
So I mean, they've got to kind of cut down. That's one of the things. Like when people ask about U.S. Open Cup, that's my biggest struggle with how they fix it is some of that geographical location problem with travel. Right. I mean, you're asking some of these teams to travel somewhere that like they're literally like putting up a GoFundMe to pay for their travel.
Yeah. So 2005, we were in the top league. I don't. There were so many different names. I don't remember what it was called. And
was it USL Pro at the time?
Yeah, I think it was USL Pro, and we lost to Seattle in the finals. From what I understand, again, I don't know for sure. It's all kind of secondhand, but like we had 3 West Coast trips that year, and every West Coast trip that cost the club between $50,000 and $100,000. Like it was a lot to go out there. So I call it self-relegation. We self-relegated down to USL. I think it was like 3 is what they called it at the time. It was the league below it. And basically our operation budget got cut in half because we didn't have to go out west. It was a shorter season. Everything was regional. Like we didn't have to fly anymore. And then we ended up winning the championship in 2006. And nobody cared that we were in that division as opposed to the other division, right? All they care about is that you win. And you win a championship. So it was one of those things where it's like, what's the blowback going to be from dropping down? But we were a really good team, and we beat a lot of really good teams, and we won a championship, and that's what people remember. Yeah. So it's interesting. I think every city and every club kind of has their niche of where they should be. And honestly, for the Kickers, I think they're in a really good position right now. And I don't know if there's aspirations to move up yet. I think we're pretty happy with where we are right now.
All right, EV, we'll turn it back to you here.
Okay, well, Ronnie, first of all, Ron, thank you very much for joining us. These were great stories, and offered a lot of insight. I will just do my little tiny bit about U.S. Open Cup. Okay. These other guys know what I'm going to say, but the NHL All-Star Skills Competition, the skills competition, right? Where they have the fastest shooters and they shoot the paper plates out of the corners of the goals and all that stuff. Okay. The NHL put up a prize purse of $1 million for the skills competition.
And for the game the next day, EV.
No, that was
to be split amongst the players. There was an additional $1 million for the game.
Right.
Holy crap.
Okay.
So $2 million, the NHL.
So $2 million put up by the NHL for the All-Star weekend. Okay. And somebody tell me that the United States Soccer Federation cannot put up $1 million for the U.S. Open Cup out of their foundation, if no other way, until they find a sponsor. Okay? Because let's take, for example, the year that you went to the West Coast 3 times.
Yeah.
Okay, that cost you $300,000. Okay, I was an English major, but that's $700,000 that your club still gets if you win the U.S. Open Cup. Okay, you're the businessman, Bone. Is that correct?
That is.
Okay. So having been part owner of the Wilmington Hammerheads back in the day, okay, we'd have stabbed people for $700,000 in public on purpose. Okay. And so it just baffles me. It just baffles me,
Yeah.
And so that's my rant on the Open Cup for this week.
That's a really good point, though.
When I saw that, I texted these guys and said, "Hey, by the way, the skills competition has a prize purse of $1 million, and U.S. Soccer can't figure out how to do the U.S. Open Cup.
Especially now with how much money they're going to be bringing in with the World Cup.
But they're bringing in with the World Cup. Streaming services now can get you. You don't necessarily have to have a TV contract. You need a streaming contract. Whatever. Yeah. Stop. I can't do this anymore. Anyway. Thank you for joining us, Ryan. Thank you for producing this show for us again, Greg. Great questions. We look forward to everybody listening to it and hearing it again. Ronnie, please give Dan Sawyer my best. Tell him I'm still using those gloves. I used them this week. It was great. But thank you very much for joining us and. One thing I did want to ask you, is there a website for Brock USA if somebody listening needs to get a field?
Yeah, it's actually pretty simple, just www.brock.com. And we will help you out any way we can. You can always get in touch with me through these guys, but I appreciate you guys having me on. It was an absolute blast. I'm actually happy I was able to remember a lot more than I thought I'd be able to.
Yeah, it was
so
good.
It's, you're doing all right. So
Ronnie, I bring it out of you.
It was all the phenomenal questions. That's what it had to be.
That's what it was.
But I had an awesome time. I appreciate it, guys.
Well, give Rob Ukrop our best. Give Deeks our best if you see him. So. Yeah. And fellas, thanks very much. We'll catch you on the next episode.
See ya. Thanks for
see ya.
Thank you for watching and listening to the Three Old Goalies podcast. Be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Three Old Goalies can also be found on Instagram and Twitter, X. Can't get enough? Check us out online at 3oldgoalies.com. Thanks again for joining us on the Three Old Goalies.